The 1976 season was a really bad one for the New York Jets, and I think that's a bit of an understatement. In fact, if you ask people what the worst season in the history of the Jets is, a lot of them will say 1976. And I can't exactly blame them. Just say it was the Lou Holtz year, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Holtz was a heck of a college coach, and is one of the greatest of all time at that level. But a great professional coach, he was not, as he flamed out in the pro ranks like Bobby Petrino and Urban Meyer, not even surviving the entire season. The Jets finished that abysmal 1976 campaign with a 3-11 record, and at no point during the season did they have a winning record, as they started the year off 0-4. The players had to learn a fight song, which I'm glad Holtz was focused on instead of the on-field product, as the Jets finished the season with the third worst offense in football, scoring just 12 points per game, and the third worst defense in football, allowing over 27 points per game, with the average margin of their games being a 3-score defeat. Their point differential of minus 214 was the second worst in football, and was so bad that a literal expansion team, the Seattle Seahawks, had a better differential than they did. Seriously, if it wasn't for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers existing and being so bad that college teams might have had a legitimate chance at beating them, the Jets would have been the worst team in football by just about every metric possible. Everything that could have gone wrong during that 1976 season did, as when your only 3 wins, with 2 against the Bills and 1 against the Bucs, are against teams that finished the season with a combined record of 2-26 for a winning percentage of 7%, I think it's fair to say you're not very good. And as it turns out, the writing was on the wall for this team during the preseason, when they lost not to any team, but rather to Mother Nature and a soccer club. Because what if I said that the New York Jets had to play 2 games in the span of 3 days? In other words, imagine if today a team played a game on Sunday Night Football and then 2 days later played on Tuesday Night Football. You'd think that's absolutely insane, incredibly unsafe and unfair, and would jeopardize the safety of everyone. Well, in 1976, that's exactly what happened. And it's all because of a soccer team. Seriously. Even though the United States was by no means a soccer nation in the 1970s, soccer still found a way to beat out the NFL in a bizarre story that deserves a deep dive roughly half a century later. And spoiler alert, it went about exactly as you'd expect for the Jets, which is to say, not very well. Because this is the story behind the New York Jets, the New York Cosmos, and the team that had to play 2 football games in the span of 3 days. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for joining this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about one of the most chaotic periods in Jets history that you probably never heard of before. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand what the original game plan was. Just about every single year, you would see this game right here in the preseason, with a battle for bragging rights between the 2 teams in the New York metropolitan area, as in the New York Giants against the New York Jets. This was the previous installment from 1975, which the Giants won 21-20. At a time when a lot of teams made their money off of gate receipts, and it wasn't as loaded on the television contract front as it is today, these annual Giants-Jets games were huge, because even though they didn't count, you could always count on them to draw high crowds, because you get 2 sets of fan bases vying for a select number of seats in one stadium, at a time when very few preseason games were televised live, and you likely had to either not see the game at all, or watch on tape delay at an ungodly hour of the night 2 days later if you wanted to watch the footage. This was especially true back in the 1970s when the rivalry between the AFC and the NFC was still pretty hot because of the merger. And in 1976, it was the Jets' turn to host this annual preseason game right here, with the game being held at Yankee Stadium. There's no footage of the 1976 game, so again, this is footage from the 1975 game that somehow exists just to show off the rivalry. You might be saying to yourself, wait a second, Yankee Stadium? Didn't the Jets play at Shea Stadium back then? And the answer to that question is, it's complicated. Yes, the Jets played all of their regular season home games at Shea, but the Jets had a very, shall we say, strenuous relationship with the Mets and the venue, and the Jets could only use the venue once football season was done. Just about every other multi-purpose venue gave both the NFL team and the MLB team priority to use the stadium, so you would see football games being held during baseball season while that baseball team was on the road. Shea Stadium was not one of those venues. It was Mets first and foremost. The Jets were an afterthought. So this meant that for every preseason game, the Jets had to find another venue to play at, and also meant that the Jets could not play at Shea until the Mets were officially eliminated, meaning that deep playoff runs, as seldom as they were, would destroy the Jets' schedule. And seeing as the preseason was in August, that meant that the Giants-Jets game, hosted by the Jets, would be on Monday, August 9th at Yankee Stadium, as in the stadium that the Giants used to call home. Sounds confusing? Well, it's about to get a whole lot more confusing when this thing right here happened. Because on August 9th, as in the day of the game, a hurricane struck Long Island and New York, with Hurricane Belle causing major damage to the area. Keep in mind that in New York City, hurricanes were very infrequent. Maybe you would catch the tail end of the hurricane and get the rains from what happened in the south. But New York would never be where the heart of the damage was. Yet, in 1976, that's exactly what happened, when for the first time in 16 years, a major hurricane hit New York, with winds reaching speeds of 100 miles per hour. The airports were shut down. The trains and the subways were shut down. People had to evacuate. A couple of people died. And more than 283,000 people on Long Island alone were estimated to be without power. The roads on Long Island were described as just impassable, and one of the major roads on Long Island looked like one big lake. This hurricane was one of the worst storms that New York had seen in years, and there was no way that the Giants and Jets could play their game that night. And sure enough, the Giants and Jets didn't play their game on Monday night because of this hurricane right here. For one, fans wouldn't have been able to get to the game. Train service was suspended, the roads would be flooded, and it would just be way too dangerous. Even those who could attend the game, which, keep in mind, was a game that literally did not count, would be downright crazy to go and sit in a hurricane instead of evacuating, considering the fact that most of these fans lived on an island just miles away from the water. And then, from a player safety standpoint, the field would have been an absolute mess and a mud pit. Yes, in 1976, you were trying to win preseason games. The starters went significantly longer, and the attitude around preseason games was vastly different than it is today, to the point where there are some instances of coaches getting fired after preseason. But at the end of the day, the most important thing in the preseason is to not get hurt. And this would have been a massive safety hazard. You had to play the Giants-Jets game at some point, but obviously, August 9th could not be the night. As one Jets spokesman said, "We just felt there was too much danger involved for our fans." So you would think that the game would be held on August 10th, right? Yes, the Jets had a preseason game that Friday on August 13th against the Oakland Raiders, so it wasn't an ideal turnaround by any means. But it wasn't an insane turnaround. Move the game back a day once the hurricane leaves and life goes somewhat back to normal and the fans can attend the game, and you're good to go. Well, not quite. Because on August 10th, there was another event taking place at Yankee Stadium that, amazingly enough, had priority over the NFL. It seems crazy, but at a baseball stadium, a soccer team had priority over a football team. And that was this team right here, as in the New York Cosmos, who called Yankee Stadium home for the entire 1976 season. At this point in time, the Cosmos were arguably the most popular soccer team in the world, and I don't say that lightly. The Cosmos were a phenomenon at a time when soccer was still seen as a novelty in the United States, as the Cosmos had arguably the best player in the world on their team, the incomparable Pelé. To this day, people consider Pelé to be the greatest soccer player of all time. And if you want to say he's number one over some of the other greats like Maradona and Messi, I'm not going to fault you. It got to a point where the Cosmos were one of the hottest tickets in town, and the 1976 season was a prime example of that, as they made it to the playoffs and finished with the second best record in the Eastern Division after leading the division with 65 goals. So when the Jets tried to have the game played the very next day, they were out of luck, because this team right here, the New York Cosmos, needed the venue for their regular season finale, a home match against the Miami Toros, which the Cosmos won in convincing fashion, taking it by a final score of 8-2. And the Jets couldn't postpone the game till later in the week because the New York Yankees, as in the primary tenant of the stadium, needed the venue for their home stretch, as they would be at home from August 16th through August 25th. And a rule at Yankee Stadium said the venue could not be used 72 hours prior to a Yankee home game in order to preserve the field, which owner George Steinbrenner was extremely particular about, to the point where he actually had the final say on whether or not Cosmo games could be held on a particular day, and he could call the game off up to 4 hours before the scheduled kickoff time. Maybe the rule would be waived under different circumstances, but considering the fact that the Yankees were first in the AL East and were fighting for a playoff spot and a trip to the World Series, no chance that was going to happen. So just to recap, you can't use the venue on Saturday or Sunday because the Yankees need it. And you can't use the venue one day later on Tuesday because of a conflict with the Cosmos, as in the team you've been watching this whole time. You had to play the game because the revenue was necessary and because you wanted to evaluate your team, especially back when preseason meant a fair amount and was used as a way to get guys into shape. And this meant that the Jets-Giants game, because of the Cosmos, had to be moved to Wednesday, August 11th, 48 hours after it was originally supposed to be played. And this was kind of a problem, seeing as, like I said before, the Jets were playing the Raiders on Friday, August 13th. This meant that the Jets had to play 2 games in 3 days. The average NFL team gets 6 days off in between games. In a stretch from a Sunday game to a Thursday game, you get 3 days off, and the players hate that. The Jets, they had 1 day off. That's it. Now, keep in mind that back in the 1920s, it wasn't uncommon to see teams play games on back-to-back days, playing the same team twice, with one being on Saturday and one being on Sunday. However, the game had evolved considerably since then and the barnstorming days. For a team to play twice in 3 days was basically unheard of in the modern era. But this was the hand that the Jets were dealt due to a hurricane and this soccer team right here. Said head coach Lou Holtz on the matter, "You know, football is not for the timid and the weak, and you'll never get a better example of it than right now. Something good will come out of this. I don't know what it is yet, but I feel sure it will." Spoiler alert, nothing good came out of this. Nothing at all. The Jets lost both preseason games, losing 16-14 to the Giants, and then unsurprisingly, on no rest whatsoever, 41-17 to the Raiders, in a game that they had just about no chance in. Usually, if you bet on preseason games, you're a complete degenerate and probably need to call the hotline. However, if there was ever a preseason game in the history of the NFL that I would have bet my life savings on, it was that one against the Raiders. because there was no universe where the Jets had a chance in it. But again, wins and losses aren't the main goal of the preseason. The preseason is about getting guys into game shape and making sure they're healthy. And surely, playing 2 games in a span of 3 days can't possibly be that bad. I'm sure that this soccer team right here that you've been watching this entire time, the New York Cosmos, didn't cause the Jets to be completely gassed and exhausted and banged up, and of course, 13 injuries in one game? You had 13 guys get injured in a single game? Normally, I'd chalk that up to playing on an Indian burial ground or something. But considering the fact that you played twice in 3 days, there's actually a pretty easy explanation for this one. What the heck did you think was going to happen? Look, the New York Cosmos were a very good soccer team and were a staple of New York sports in the 1970s. They were the best football team in New York, because it sure as heck wasn't the Jets and Giants during this time period, I know that much, with their combined 0 playoff appearances over the course of that decade. But it wasn't bad enough for the Jets to be kicked out of one stadium, as in the one by the Mets. They had to be kicked out of another stadium, with the Cosmos kicking them out thanks in part to a hurricane and a massive scheduling conflict. The Jets were a really bad team in 1976, and this conflict with Hurricane Bell and the New York Cosmos of all teams was a really bad omen and sign of things to come. Because in 1976, the Cosmos made the Jets play a preseason schedule that seemed out of this world. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.